Turn to Judges chapter 3. As we said, we started in the beginning, we jumped around at the end, or jumped to the end, and went over and saw the need for judges. Today we'll explain some of that, and we'll see who the first judges are. So your Bibles should be open to Judges chapter 3 for lesson 80, Othniel and Ehud. So Othniel rules, we understand, sometimes soon after the death of Joshua and Caleb. So he would be someone who was left from the older generation. Obviously, he could not have been over 20 at the time when Israel tried to get into the land the first time, but maybe he was just under that age, so that he is one of the older generation. He had seen the miracles and stuff that was done in the wilderness. He had seen the miracles and the conquering of the land of Canaan. Okay? So that obviously shows how quickly Israel fell into that sin, as we read there at the end of Judges. Every man did what he thought what was right in his own eyes. So take a look at Judges chapter 3. I'm going to start reading at verse 5 here. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgat the Lord their God, and served Balaam and the groves. Follow along there, Sid. Verse 8. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. And when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel, who delivered them, even Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. Some of the questions that you have there on your sheet have to deal with: why is it necessary for the people to have judges? What is going on? Well, there's a cycle. And we'll see this over and over and over. First, the people begin to fall into sins and temptations. Quite often, that means marrying the women of the wicked nations, or giving their daughters to marry the men of those wicked nations. And then quite often it means worshiping the idols of these wicked nations. So first is the falling into sin. Next, what comes? Well, because the people fall into sin, God often gave Israel over to their enemies. Those other nations that were in the land that we read, that lots of them, that's quite common. Okay? They come in, they are given the opportunity by the Lord to come in and oftentimes defeat and take over the Israelites and make them their servants, or make them pay tribute, or do something to make their lives miserable. The third step then always is, finally, the people of Israel become tired of serving this other kingdom or nation, or they're tired of having to pay the taxes and the tribute. And so they cry out to the Lord, Lord, deliver us. We give up. We are finally willing to say, we will put aside our sins. We will leave from our wickedness and worship Thee. So that's the third step, calling on God. And the fourth step then is that God sends a judge, a man, to deliver them out of the power of this other nation. And he demands and tells Israel to turn to the Lord. Leave off of your wicked, sinful ways. Then you will be blessed. And so, That's what they're called to do. Turn off from their wicked ways. And they often do that, but only for a short time. And then they quickly fall back into their wicked and sinful ways. And that's exactly what we begin to see. The people are, they were tired, we talked about. They were sick of war, having to push out all of those wicked nations living around them. They were tired of that. And so it was much easier just to ignore it, just to let them live in the land. Okay? They worshipped, as we said, the wicked idols. They married the heathen wives. And God's anger then becomes very hot. And here he sends, in verse 8, they fell into the hands. The first king that they fall into is Cushan-Rishathaim. Okay? How did God, it says, he sold them into the hand. This is not he sold them like God said, here, you give me 1,000,000 gold shekels, silver shekels, Cushan-Rishathaim, and I will give you the people. That's not the idea here. They weren't sold for a price. But here sold means he gave them over to. In other words, God planted the idea into the mind of Cushan-Rishathaim. Why don't I go and conquer this people Israel? And so he does that. Okay? And all of the land becomes conquered by him. And then God leaves them for a time. So we understand that for 8 years they were under the rule of Cushan-Rishathaim. And that's where he picked up in verse 9. So let's see that verse 9. We read that he rose up Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And then we read in verse 10. Follow along there. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And his hand prevailed against Cushan-Rishathaim. And the land had rest 40 years, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. We don't know much there. We've got 3 verses regarding Othniel here. He was Caleb's younger brother. We know that. We know what Othniel means. It means lion of God. God sends Othniel here as a lion of God, to bring them out of their wickedness. We know that God probably, as he would with any man, gave his Spirit to him. We read that in verse 10, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So God sent his Spirit, which made him able to be a leader and to judge Israel for their wickedness. Okay? So he's a friend of God. So he judged them, and then he obviously tells them, turn from your sins and your wickedness, turn to the Lord, and then you will have the victory over your enemies. And so then Israel was able to fight, and they defeated Cushan-Rishathaim. They pushed him and all of his soldiers out of the land of Israel. And so they had rest. We read for 40 years they had rest there. Their enemies did not bother them. Now, Othniel probably, didn't live to the end of the 40 years, but he probably died somewhere in there, and that's, again, during that 40 years of peace is going to be when they begin to start turning towards the Lord, towards their sinful, wicked ways. That's why it says in verse 12, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered unto him the children of Ammon and Amalek, and went and smote Israel, and possessed the city of palm trees. So the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So again, during that 40 years of peace, probably towards the end, many of the Israelites, some of them now a new generation that had risen up, begin to do that which is right in their own eyes again. And they fall into that same sin. They marry the wicked heathen wives of the lands around them, or they give their daughters to be married to those wicked sons. They themselves begin to worship idols. They begin to fail to go to the tabernacle and sacrifice. They think it's too much. They're too lazy. They don't push the others out of land. And so God sends someone to bother them. And this time, he sends King Eglon. Okay? He sends King Eglon, who is king of Moab. Eglon had gotten some other nations together too, Ammon and Amalek, and they all come and they defeat Israel. They capture them. Now, they don't take them out of their land. They say, you can live here in this land of Canaan. We'll let you live here, but you're going to be paying us tribute. You're going to be paying us taxes. And that's the only way that we will leave you alone and not destroy you. Okay? So, Israel, you can imagine, here comes an enemy. Well, they grabbed up their swords and their spears and their plowshares and whatever it is, bows and arrows, whatever they had. But they were powerless against this enemy because the Lord was not on their side. Okay? And so they quickly fall. And for 18 years, they have to suffer under the rule of Eglon. And so finally, at the end of 18 years, they begin to cry out for help. Now, during that 18 years and going back to the 40 years of peace, again, there was always a godly remnant in Israel. So there was a group of godly men and women and children who obeyed the Lord and loved the Lord, but they by far were the minority. They didn't have much power. They were by far the minority. And so it happens that, even though they are godly and they pray to God, it's the sins and the wickedness of all of Israel that needs to be punished. And so God, unfortunately, those children of God are also under the rule of Eglon. But God finally, at the end of 18 years, hears their cry for help. They cry out for help and ask God for help. And at the end of 18 years, He finally hears them. And that's where we see this guy, Ehud. So, take a look at verse 15. But when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised them up a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gerar, a Benjamite, a man left-handed, and by him the children of Israel sent a present unto Eglon, the king of Moab. That's their taxes, that present. But Ehud made him a dagger, which had 2 edges. So not a sword with one sharp edge and one dull edge, but a double-edged dagger, 2 sharp edges, of a cubit length. Probably from elbow to the hand here, a cubit length. And he did gird it under his raiment upon his right thigh. So being left-handed, he would put it on this side, the scabbard, so that he could quickly draw it out. Over here would be hard to draw it out straight and then be ready to do battle. But here you can draw it out immediately, just as if I was right-handed. I could draw it out my left side and immediately go into a cutting motion against my enemy. So he hid it under his raiment on his right thigh. And he brought the present unto Eglon, king of Moab. And Eglon was a very fat man. And when he had made an end to offer the present, he sent away the people that bare the present. But he himself turned again from the quarries that were by Gilgal and said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king. Who said, keep silence. And all that stood by him went out from him. And Ehud came unto him, and he was sitting in a summer parlor, which he had for himself alone. And Ehud said, I have a message from God unto thee. And he arose out of his seat, and Ehud put forth his left hand, and took the dagger from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. And the haft also went in after the blade, and the fat closed upon the blade, so that he could not draw the dagger out of his belly, and the dirt came out. Then Ehud went forth through the porch, and shut the doors of the parlor upon him, and locked them. When he was gone out, his servants came, and when they saw that, behold, the doors of the parlor were locked, they said, surely he covereth his feet in the summer chamber. And they tarried till they were ashamed, and behold, he opened not the doors of the parlor. Therefore they took a key and opened them, and behold, their lord was fallen down dead on the earth. And Ehud escaped while they tarried, and passed beyond the quarries, and escaped unto Siriath. And it came to pass when he was come that he blew a trumpet in the mountain of Ephraim, and the children of Israel went down with him from the mount, and he before them. And he said unto them, follow after me, for the Lord hath delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. And they went down after him, and took the fords of Jordan toward Moab, and suffered not a man to pass over. And they slew Moab at that time about 10,000 men, all lusty, and all men of valor. And there escaped not a man. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel. And the land had rest 80 years. So God raised up a deliverer. We know his name is Ehud. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. and he's a left-handed man. God gave unto him faith, but also a spirit of the Lord. And so Ehud made himself plans. He knew that soon a group of people from Israel would be bringing the taxes, the gift, the present to King Ehud, their yearly taxes. And so he made himself that special dagger that we showed. He put it in the scabbard, okay, on his right-hand side. And he travels with that group of men to King Eglon in Moab, and he delivers the present to the king up in the palace. By now he's been searched as he and the other men go up. The servants checking, they check his left side, thinking most men are right-handed. That's where their dagger always is over on the left side. But they do not check his right-hand side. And so he goes, and they give their gift to the king, and then they leave. They go away. But on their journey away, Ehud turns to the other men and says, I have an errand yet with the king. And so he turns around and he goes back. You can imagine him knocking at the palace gate once again saying, I've got a special message for the king. A special private message for the king. I have to deliver it to him. And these soldiers, just having seen Ehud, their guard is probably down, and they allow him in, or just, again, quickly search him. Yep, nothing over here on his left-hand side, and fail to check the other side, probably because they're so at ease, because this man has just been in their presence before, and if he hasn't done anything to the king before, why would he do it now? And so they say, come on in, and they allow him to go up to the area where the king's chamber is, and probably some more guards let him through there. And he goes in, and King Eglon is sitting there in his chair, and he's surrounded by other men, and Ehud tells the men there, I have a message for the king, but it's a private message. It's one I have to give to him personally. And so the king wanted to know what the message is, and having just seen this man before, trusting him, says, maybe he's thinking he's getting more presents or more gifts. He's rubbing his hands together. And so he sends all of his servants out, and they lock the door so that no one can come in. And now Ehud can tell the king, well, at least the king thinks, now Ehud can tell him the message, what it is. And Ehud does have a message. He tells him, okay, I have a message from God for thee. Okay, and he gives him that message, probably the message of sin and wickedness and damnation. And while he's doing that, whispering in the king's ear, he can draw that sword out with his left hand, that dagger, and shoves it into the belly of King Ehud. So much so that that shaft goes all the way in, and Ehud is unable to pull it out. And it sticks in him. And the fat closes around it. We read the dirt, so his insides, the blood, and probably everything in his intestines comes spilling out. A stinky, smelly mess. Ehud quickly gets out of there. He probably lets himself down from a chamber window because the doors are locked. He doesn't want to go that way because then the servants will know he's done and quickly come in and find King Ehud. So he escapes a different way and begins to take off and run out towards Mount Ephraim, where he can alert the other Israelites by trumpet of what has gone on. And so he does that, and he blows the trumpet. And the people and men of Israel come out of their hiding, knowing now that they are ready. It's been prepared. The Lord is on their side, and they'll be able to defeat their Moabitish enemies. Meanwhile, back at the palace, it's been a while. Some of the guards begin to fret, or his servants begin to talk. Well, should we go in and see the king? And think, well, no, today's a beautiful day, and a lot of days like today, he likes to sun himself. He likes to lay privately on his porch. Let us just leave him there. He's probably just taking a nap. He's forgotten to come to the door. He's allowed the other man to go. So let's just leave him alone for a while. And probably a few more hours later, they begin to wonder, now this is kind of odd. Usually he needs something to eat or drink, or he's calling for something's not right. And so they go and they get the key, and they insert it into the door, and they turn the key. And they open the door, and there's their king on the other side of the door, laying face down, probably on the ground, dead, and a pool of blood in his guts. And they know immediately what's happened. They go check for a pulse. They see there's none there. They sound the alarm, but by now, Ehud is a long ways away. In fact, by now, he's called for the children of Israel, and they're probably on their way back towards the palace here, towards where Ehud reigned from. And so Israel went out. They did battle. And they won the battle. The Lord was on their side. Over 10,000 of their enemies were killed in that day. So we wonder, Was that murder on the part of Ehud? Or was it allowed? God commanded Ehud to do that. That was God's demand for Ehud. So we would say it's not murder. Imagine the Lord had, just like if you and I are called to go into battle by our government, to be in the army, and we shoot the enemy, that's not murder because we've been called on, commanded to do this deed. The Lord has given the sword to the government to be able to do so, the permission to do so. And so then after that, after defeating Moab, they have 80 years of rest. Now how can we apply this to our lives? That's important. We do battle with the wicked world around us each day. We don't have anybody that we're going out with, hopefully, a dagger and stabbing. And we aren't captured. We aren't slaves and sending money to to Mexico or Canada or any country that's taken over our lands. But in a sense, we are always under attack from the wicked. And so we too need to be ready to do battle with them. We must not fall into the sinful temptations that the Israelites did here of, ooh, boy, yeah, she's not a godly girl. She doesn't go to church, but she sure is pretty. I would like to marry her. Or, ooh, that young man, he sure is handsome. Yeah, he cares nothing about the Lord. He does nothing on Sunday. He doesn't have anything to do with the Lord. He uses his name in vain. I don't even know him, but he sure looks handsome. We need to be careful of those things. We need to find godly husbands and wives that we marry. We need to make sure we don't make idols out of things in our lives, that we worship them. So instead of spending time in God's house on the Sabbath day, we go out and have fun and we do what we want to do, or we need to be careful. It's that end last verse in Judges. Make sure we do not do what's right in our own sight, but we do what is pleasing to the Lord. And that way we can make sure that we do not fall into the same traps that the Israelites here did.